D P Denton, Chapter 7. Dan was hardly conscious of the passing of the miles as the cabbie agent drove the 100 miles toward his home. He knew he was in safe hands and that by now all the bureau men in this area would be ready to help if any were needed. He had not slept since leaving home, so he laid down in the back seat and went to sleep. A sleep that was disturbed by all kinds of dangerous visions. But exhaustion produces sleep, and Dan slept until he was awakened by the voice of the driver. "Here's our man now." Looking out, Dan saw a hitchhiker thumbing for a ride, but recognized through it all the face of 35. When he jumped into the seat beside Dan, he slipped his arm around the preacher's shoulders, gave him a playful hug, and said, "21 plus? We almost lost you that time, but I am surely glad that you are back. Your God must certainly be with you. Now we have no time to lose on this end. Your transmitter is still working, and there have been some excited people over there in the last few days. They already know about things down at the other place, and they are sure that someone is on to them. So they plan to move tomorrow. They had planned to go to the area, but now they are going to stop at the big city and work out of there. Oh yes, your wife and boys are visiting her mother. Someone got sick and she had to go. I heard her telling the renters to tell you when you came back, so she is out of danger. But 21 plus, they definitely suspect you now, so we had better make arrangements for your protection. And then you had better drop out of sight for a while. Think you can arrange it?" "Yes," said Dan. "I felt that this would come sooner or later, so have been giving it some thought. I can go to B to live and carry on a downtown church work, and I think I can manage it soon." "Good," and 35 seemed real pleased. "We need a man there, and I can arrange to move there also so that we can continue to work together. In the meantime, you will need a man with you until the folk leave, for none of us know what they might try if they caught you alone. Do I look like a visiting minister?" Dan laughed. "Why, yes, you surely do. In fact, I think you are Brother Brown from Arkansas, who has come to spend a few days with me. I'll be expecting you soon, Brother Brown." "Good," smiled 35. "Do you still have 67's pistol?" And when Dan answered that he did, he continued, "Keep it, and be ready to use it if necessary. These folks are desperate. All they have tried to do since they came here has failed, and they are really wondering if you don't have something to do with it." A word to the driver, and the cab stopped on a deserted stretch of road to put out a hitchhiker, but within 30 minutes from the time Dan arrived home, the cab pulled up again and deposited a dignified-looking man, whom Dan welcomed into his home as an old acquaintance, Reverend Robert Brown from Arkansas. There was a definite coolness in the attitude of the renters when they gave Dan Laurie's message about her absence, and after the older man returned, the coolness turned to ice, and Dan received many long, hard stares as a foreign spy tried vainly to confirm his suspicions. But Reverend Brown was with him all the time and kept up a constant patter of talk, even engaging the enemy in a conversation about salvation, so that he had little opportunity to study Dan or to form any definite conclusions. Their first night home, he informed Dan that he had a much better job in another city, giving a false forwarding address, and that they would be leaving the next day. Thanks to Reverend Brown's presence, there was no unpleasant incidences, and Dan breathed a tremendous sigh of relief the next day when they finally drove away. Laurie and the boys even got back in time to see them off, and innocent as she was, actually shed a few tears to see them go. Soon after that, the Reverend Brown bid them farewell and left them alone for the first time in 6 months. But Dan had 2 important jobs to do. He must shut off the faithful transmitter that had served its country so well, and must fix it so that no one would ever guess its secret. Then he must break the news to Laurie that they would be moving soon, and that was the hardest task. To move directly from one city to another would be too obvious and too easy for the enemy to trace. But how could he explain 2 or 3 clandestine moves to Laurie and secure her cooperation? This problem drove him again to seclusion and prayer, but God gave him the answer. Late that night, he and Laurie had a long talk. He felt that his work here was done, and that he wanted to be out of this pastorate soon. Also, he wanted to be free to take some revival meetings. Laurie was naturally puzzled, but stood by her promise before their marriage that she would go wherever he felt that he should go. Some years before, they had bought a little piece in the country in another section, and now it was decided to move there. They could not move at once, since it was leased for a year, so they would store part of their things in their own house and move into an apartment in a nearby town. Dan thanked God for a faithful companion who would cooperate without asking too many questions. In a few short weeks, Dan had resigned from the church and moved, at least the folk thought, to his place in the country. The load which the mover had on his truck didn't go to the country and was stored upstairs. But after the mover left, the load on Dan's luggage trailer went on to town to an apartment house. No one in the apartment knew them, and since it had been rented by one of Dan's good friends from the bureau, no one knew their names. Those were miserable days for Laurie, for there was no possibility of her enjoying a normal life under the circumstances. Dan so longed to tell her that it wouldn't last long, but he had to keep quiet and trust her good common sense and loyalty to hold out for a few more days. They had moved into the apartment on Tuesday. On Friday, Dan left early for a trip to B. He told Laurie that he had business there, and so he did. He had to contact the group in charge of the downtown church work that he was taking, and then secure a house in which to live. But much of the details of this had been taken care of in that mysterious way that had been developing for some months. First, the church group was already expecting him and holding the place for him. Then, as he walked down the street wondering where he could find a house to rent or buy, a man fell in step with him, and the familiar voice of 35 said, "Don't look now, just listen. Your house is at blank Avenue. The down payment has already been made on it. All that remains is for you to go by the office at blank Street, sign the agreement, and pick up the keys. That location will keep you near the church and right in the center of our activity. Now slow down." Instinctively, Dan slowed his pace slightly, and 35 moved on. To an onlooker, it would have appeared to have been a faster walker passing a slow one. Before Dan turned his car back toward Laurie and the apartment that afternoon, everything was arranged, and he was ready to make the next move. The following Monday, to the astonishment of the other apartment dwellers, they moved out, and the mover was sworn to secrecy not to reveal where they went. For many years after that, Dan and Laurie would laugh about their few days in that apartment where no one knew who they were, or even where they came from, or where they went. When at last they were settled in their new location, Dan breathed easier and felt safer. Eventually, his friends would learn of his whereabouts, but he felt sure that he had outwitted the enemy. This proved to be true for only a short period of time.